His hand was on his friend's leg, slow and steady, like it belonged there. Not a pat, not a quick touch. The kind of contact that has a history behind it. And she saw it. Every second of it. What came after? The lobby, the silence, the phone ringing and ringing in her hand. That's where this story really begins. Then there's the night that started as a game. His grip on her wrist, tight enough that she stopped laughing, tight enough that she stopped moving. And somewhere in the space between the joke and the fear, she realized she was alone with someone she trusted. And this one, a woman who thought she was doing the right thing. She handed him the phone, showed him the messages, watched his face change. A door slammed, and the love she thought was solid enough to survive anything turned out to have an edge, and she had just found it. Then there's him, sitting somewhere far away inside his own head. Not there, not present, barely in the room. She heard the cat before she saw his face. When she turned around, he was staring at nothing. A gaze that didn't ask for help and wasn't going to. Some silences are louder than anything either of you could say. 4 people. 4 moments where something shifted and couldn't shift back. Their confessions are next. The fairy lights strung across the ceiling of the gallery were the kind that flickered just slightly, like I couldn't quite commit to staying on. I remember noticing that when we first walked in, the way the whole room pulsed with this warm, unsteady glow, and thinking it was beautiful. I was holding a glass of Prosecco I hadn't tasted yet, and Marcus had his hand at the small of my back. Everything felt exactly the way a new relationship is supposed to feel. Careful, promising, like something you don't want to hold too tight. It was a charity art auction. One of those events where the pieces on the walls cost more than my rent, and everyone is dressed like they are trying to look like they are not trying. Marcus worked in design. He knew people in that world, and he'd been excited to bring me. "You'll love it," he'd said in the car, and the way he said it made me feel chosen in a small, specific way that's hard to explain. We'd been together for about 4 months at that point. Long enough that the first date nerves had settled, but short enough that we still had edges we hadn't mapped yet. Soft spots we hadn't found. We were still in the phase where you're learning the rules without ever writing them down. Who texts first in the morning? How much space is the right amount of space? Which silences are comfortable and which ones mean something? I told myself I was good at this part, at being easy, at not needing too much. The gallery was in an old warehouse space that had been converted. Exposed brick, concrete floors, those industrial pendant lights hanging low over the bar. The art on the walls was abstract, mostly large-scale pieces in deep blues and burnt oranges. The kind of thing that looks like an argument between colors. There was a string quartet in the corner, playing something contemporary I didn't recognize. The sound of it mixed with the crowd noise in a way that made everything feel slightly underwater. Marcus got us fresh drinks and introduced me to a few people. A couple he knew from a previous job, a photographer whose work was hanging near the entrance. I was doing fine. I was doing what I always do in rooms full of strangers. Listening more than talking, laughing at the right moments. Keeping my shoulders down. And then across the room, I saw him light up. Not in the way he lit up for me. Different. Easier maybe. Like a switch that didn't need any effort to flip. He was looking toward the far end of the gallery, and his whole face had rearranged itself into something open and delighted. Before I could track what he was looking at, he'd already taken 2 steps away from me. "Danny," he said, loud enough to carry. "You actually came." I'd heard about Daniela before. Twice, actually. Once in passing, once in more detail. They'd been close friends since college. She was an architect now, worked with some firm downtown. Marcus had described her as one of those people who makes every room more interesting. The kind of thing you say about someone and don't realize how it lands until you're standing in a gallery, watching your boyfriend cross the room toward her. She's tall. Dark hair, pinned up with a few pieces loose around her face. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of deep water. She was already laughing at something before Marcus even reached her, like she'd heard the joke ahead of time. I stayed where I was for a moment. Just a moment. Then I followed. The introduction was warm and normal. Daniela shook my hand, said she'd heard so much about me. She said it with what seemed like genuine warmth. I smiled and said something polite back. The three of us stood in a small plaster and I held my glass. I was present, I was participating, but some part of me had already started doing the thing I do when I'm uncomfortable. Cataloging, filing. The way she touched his arm when she laughed. The way he leaned in when she talked. Like the room had gotten louder and he needed to catch every word. The way their conversation had a shorthand I couldn't enter. References to people I didn't know, to a trip they'd both taken years ago. To some professor they'd both hated, who apparently had a habit of chewing his pen during critiques. You know that feeling when you're standing right next to someone and still somehow on the outside of the glass. That was the feeling. I named it something other than jealousy at first. I called it tired. I called it the Prosecco. I called it the flickering lights. We moved through the gallery in a loose group, Marcus, Daniela, and me. At some point, another friend of theirs joined, a guy named Theo. He was easy to talk to and who, bless him, actually tried to include me in the conversation. I was grateful for that. I talked to Theo about the art, about the auction process, about whether any of the pieces were worth what they were asking. But I kept finding Marcus with my eyes. And every time I did, he was looking at her. Not in a way that should have meant anything. Not in a way I could have pointed to and said, "There, that's the thing." It was subtler than that. It was the quality of his attention. He gives me his attention too. I knew that. I know that. But this was different. This was the attention you give someone who has known you long enough to hold something on your behalf. Something you don't have to explain. I don't know exactly when discomfort became something sharper. It was gradual, and then it wasn't. At some point during the live bidding, Marcus leaned over to Daniela and said something low near her ear. She covered her mouth with her hand and laughed. That silent, shaking laugh that means something was genuinely funny, not politely funny. I watched his face while she laughed, and he looked so pleased with himself. So lit up by the fact that he'd made her do that. I felt something move through my chest that I didn't want to feel. I set my glass down on a nearby table. "I'm going to get some water," I said, to no one in particular. Marcus glanced over. "You okay?" "Fine," I said. "I'll be right back." I wasn't right back. I stood near the bar for longer than I needed to. Long enough that Marcus found me. "Hey," he said, coming up beside me. "You disappeared." I didn't disappear. I'm right here. He looked at me the way people look at you when they're deciding whether to press. "You seem quiet." I'm always quiet at parties. Not like this. And there it is. The moment where I could have let it go. Where I could have said, "I'm just tired," or "the room is a lot," and he would have accepted that. We would have finished the evening and gone home, and none of what happened next would have happened. I thought about the door a lot, the one I didn't take. Instead I said, "You've barely talked to me since she got here." The words came out flatter than I intended. Not accusatory exactly, but stripped of softness. He blinked. "What?" "Daniela, since she arrived I don't know, I've been standing there." He was quiet for a second, and in that second, I watched something shift in his expression. Not anger, something more careful. "She's one of my oldest friends, Nora. I haven't seen her in 2 months." "I know that." "Then what are you?" "I'm not saying you can't talk to her. I'm saying I've been right next to you for the last hour, and you've looked at me maybe twice." He exhaled, ran a hand along the back of his neck. "I didn't realize I was doing that." "Okay. That's not... Nora, I'm not going to apologize for being happy to see my friend. I'm not asking you to apologize for that." "Then what are you asking?" What I said next, I've replayed it maybe 100 times. I'm asking whether I'm going to feel like a guest every time she's in the room. The words landed. I saw them land. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. The string quartet was still playing somewhere behind us. Someone near the bar laughed at something, and the sound felt wrong. Too loud, too bright for what was happening in the small space between us. "That's not fair," he said, quietly. Not angry. Something worse than angry. Measured. "Maybe not," I said, and I meant it. But I didn't take it back. He looked away toward the gallery floor, and I could see him deciding something. "I think we should finish the evening and talk about this when we're not in the middle of it." "Sure." "I mean that, not as a dismissal, He stopped. "This isn't the place." "I know," I said. "You're right." But there was a coolness between us now that hadn't been there before. The kind that doesn't announce itself. It just settles. We went back. We stood with Daniela and Theo for another 40 minutes or so. I was pleasant. I asked Daniela about her work, and she told me about a project she was excited about. I listened and nodded and said the right things. She was warm. She was genuinely warm. She didn't know anything had happened, and that somehow made it worse. The way the whole thing was entirely inside me, entirely my own production. Markus drove. He held my hand across the gear shift, which surprised me. I let him. We didn't talk on the drive home, not about what had happened. We talked about the art. He pointed out a piece he'd liked. I said something about the color palette. We did a small talk of two people who are both waiting. The city moved past the windows and I watched it. I felt the particular exhaustion of having made a thing happen that didn't need to happen. In his apartment, I sat on the couch and he sat beside me. For a while, we just existed in the quiet. "Can I say something?" he said finally. "Yes." "I hear what you were saying tonight, and I don't want you to feel like that. I genuinely don't." He paused. "But I also need you to know that she's not going anywhere. She's been in my life for a long time and she's important to me and I can't change that." "I know," I said. "I don't want you to change it. But you want something to be different." I looked at my hands. "I think I want to not feel like I'm competing with someone who already won." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not competing with her. There's no competition." "Logically, I know that." "Then what is it?" "What is it?" I sat with that for a long time. What it actually was, wasn't about Daniela. Not really. It was about the fact that she knew him in a way I didn't yet. That she had years of him, and I had 4 months. And sometimes, 4 months feels like nothing when you're standing next to a decade. It was about my own fear that I would always be the newcomer. That I would always be earning something that she'd been given a long time ago. I tried to say some version of that. It came out awkward and halting and not quite right. The way true things sometimes do when you are saying them for the first time out loud. But he listened. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he said, "That makes sense." Not, "You're being ridiculous." Not, "You have nothing to worry about." Just, "That makes sense." And somehow, that was the thing that finally made my chest loosen. We didn't solve anything that night. I want to be honest about that. There wasn't a moment where everything clicked into place and the insecurity dissolved. What happened was smaller and more real than that. I apologize for the way I'd said what I said. Not for feeling it. I was past apologizing for feelings. But for the delivery, for the sharpness, for putting him in a position in the middle of a room full of people. He accepted it without making me feel small for needing to give it. He said he'd try to be more mindful. I believed him. I drove home around midnight. I sat in my car in front of my building for a few minutes before going up. Not crying, not spiraling, just sitting. The street was quiet and the inside of the car smelled like the perfume I'd put on 6 hours ago. Here's what I know now, a few months removed from that night. The jealousy wasn't really about Daniela. It was a signal. A flare sent up from some part of me that was afraid. Afraid of wanting something this much. Afraid of how exposed that wanting makes you. Afraid that caring deeply about someone means handing them the ability to hurt you without meaning to. The friendship was never the problem. The friendship was just the thing I could see. The actual problem was that I had let myself fall for Marcus more than I'd admitted to myself. And that terrified me. Instead of sitting with the terror, I aimed it somewhere. At her laugh, at his attention, at a room full of flickering lights. I don't think jealousy makes you a bad person. I think it makes you a person who's scared and hasn't found a better language for it yet. I'm still working on the language. We are still together, Marcus and I. I've met Daniela a handful of times since that night. For dinner once, at another event, briefly on a Sunday afternoon when she stopped by his place. She's exactly as warm as she seemed that first night. She's the kind of person who remembers small things you mentioned weeks ago and asks about them later. I understand now why he lights up when he sees her. I still feel the old pull sometimes. A small tug in my chest when they're mid-laugh about something I wasn't there for. But I've stopped calling it something other than what it is. And I've stopped treating it like evidence. It's just fear. Just mine. Just something to hold gently until it loosens. That's all it ever was. Something to hold gently until it loosens. She held it. But the thing in the next story didn't loosen. His apartment smelled like cedar and old paperbacks. The kind of place that makes you feel like you finally found someone who knows how to be a person. She thought that. She actually thought that. And then one afternoon, her laughter went quiet in the middle of a room full of carefully sorted books. And she couldn't quite remember when she'd stopped being playful and started being still. What do you do when the moment you realize you're scared is the same moment you realize you can't move? His apartment smelled like cedar and old paperbacks. And the first time I walked in, I thought, this is what a person who has their life together smells like. His name was Marcus. He had a bookshelf that took up an entire wall, organized not by author or title, but by color. Deep reds bleeding into burgundies, blues stacked pale to dark like a gradient of sky. I asked him about it once, early on, and he said it was the only way he could think about books without feeling overwhelmed by them. I thought that was beautiful. I wrote it down in my journal that night. His name was Marcus, and I was 24, and I had been half living inside other people's apartments for most of my adult life, without ever quite feeling like I was allowed to take up space. But his place, that apartment on the 4th floor of a building with a broken elevator, and a super named Gil who always smelled like cigarettes, felt different. It felt like somewhere I could exhale. We had been together about 3 months when I started staying over on weeknights. Not every night, 2, maybe 3 times a week. He'd make coffee in the morning, always too strong, always in the same chipped blue mug he handed to me like it was mine. We'd sit by the window that looked out over the parking lot and pretend it was a view worth having. That was our joke. The view. He'd gesture at the dumpsters below with a theatrical sweep of his arm, like a real estate agent, and say, "And here you have the courtyard." And I'd laugh every single time. Even when I didn't feel like it, because it was ours. I should have paid attention to how much I needed it to be ours. The first thing that felt wrong, I dismissed before I even finished feeling it. It was a Thursday in October. I remember because I had come straight from my friend Danny's birthday dinner. I was still wearing the earrings I'd borrowed from her, these long gold things that swung when I moved. I walked in and Marcus was already home, sitting on the couch with his laptop. He looked up at me and then back at his screen, and something in his face did a thing I hadn't seen before. "You're late," he said. I checked my phone. It was 9:47. We hadn't made plans for a specific time. I hadn't said I'd be there at 9. "Danny's dinner ran long," I said. "You texted me at 9:15 saying you were leaving. It doesn't take 45 minutes to get here from that restaurant." He was right that it didn't take 45 minutes. It took 20. I had stopped for gas. I told him that. He nodded, slowly, the way someone nods when they're deciding whether to believe you. Then he smiled and said, "Okay, come sit with me." And I did. We watched something on his laptop and he rubbed my feet and I told myself, he just missed you, that's all that was. That was the last night I felt completely comfortable in that apartment. But I stayed. Of course I stayed. Because the next morning he made the coffee and handed me the blue mug. He gestured at the dumpsters and said, "And over here we have the East Wing courtyard." And I laughed genuinely. It felt like proof that the night before had been nothing. You know that feeling when you have two truths that can't both be right, and so you choose the one that lets you keep what you have? I chose the blue mug, every time. The pattern, when I look back at it now, was almost elegant in how slowly it moved. There was never a single moment where I could point and say, "There, that's when it changed." It was more like the temperature dropping 1 degree at a time until you realize you've been cold for a long time and didn't notice. He started asking about Dunnemore. Not warmly. With a kind of precision. What did we talk about? Did any guys come to the dinner? Did I drink? How much? I answered because the questions, individually, didn't sound like what they were. They sounded like interest. They sounded like someone who wanted to know my life. He moved my phone once when it buzzed on the table between us. Just picked it up and placed it face down on the counter without looking at it, without saying anything, like it was a book he was clearing out of the way. I watched him do it. I didn't say anything either. I didn't know it yet, but that gesture was going to matter. The night everything cracked open was a Saturday in November. Cold enough that I'd been wearing his sweatshirt all day, the grey one with the university logo that was 2 sizes too big on me. We'd been having a good day, actually. We'd gone to the farmer's market in the morning, bought apples and a candle and a jar of honey we didn't need. We came back and spent the afternoon on the couch, in that specific lazy way that feels like the reward for a whole week of being a functional adult. I was happy. I want to say that clearly. I was genuinely happy that afternoon. Around 8, a text from a friend named Joel. We'd known each other since college. The kind of friend who exists mostly in memes and occasional check-ins. He'd sent me a link to something, a video, with a caption that was just 3 laughing emojis. I laughed at the video. Out loud, just a small laugh, the involuntary kind. Marcus looked over from his end of the couch. "Who's that?" "Joel, he sent me something funny." There was a pause. Not long. Maybe 4 seconds. But it had a texture to it. "Joel," Marcus said. "Yeah, you know, I've mentioned him. We were in the same friend group in college." "You've mentioned him." He said it like he was tasting the words. "You haven't mentioned that you still text him." "I mean, we don't really. It's just occasionally." "Can I see your phone?" I looked at him. He was looking at me with this expression that was almost calm, almost patient, like he was asking me something reasonable, like he was asking me to pass the remote. "Marcus," I said. "It's just a video of a dog doing something stupid." "Then it shouldn't be a problem to show me." The room was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming from the kitchen. I was still wearing his sweatshirt. "I'm not showing you my phone," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He set down his own phone. Slowly. He turned to face me fully, and something in the air changed. The pressure of it, the temperature. And he said, "Why not? What are you hiding?" "Nothing. I'm not hiding anything. It's the principle." "The principle." He laughed, but it was not a warm laugh. "You're in my apartment, wearing my clothes, and you won't show me who you're talking to. And that's a principle." I kept my eyes on the door the whole time he was talking. "I'm going to use the bathroom," I said. I stood up. He didn't move to stop me. He just watched me walk down the hallway with this expression I can only describe as patient. Like he had decided to wait me out. Like he knew I was going to come back, and that waiting was something he was willing to do. I stood in his bathroom, with the door locked and the fan on, and my hands pressed flat against the cold edge of the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror and I thought, when did I start locking the door? I came back out. Because I didn't know what else to do. Because my coat was on the chair by the front door, and I would have had to walk past him to get it. Something in me wasn't ready for what that walk might become. He had moved to the kitchen. He was pouring himself a glass of water, and when I came back into the living room, he turned around and his face was different, softer, almost tired. The way people look after a storm has passed, even if you weren't sure the storm was over. "I don't want to fight," he said. I don't either. He set the glass down. I get scared, okay? I've been hurt before and I need to know you're not going anywhere. And here is the thing about that sentence. Here is the thing that I have turned over in my hands 100 times since. It was probably true. He probably had been hurt before. He probably did feel scared. Those things can be real and still be used as a key to a lock you didn't know you'd installed. I'm not going anywhere, I said. He crossed the room and hugged me, and I let him. I stood there with my face against his shoulder and my arms around him, and I felt like I was playing a role I hadn't auditioned for. Like I was performing comfort for an audience of one. We went to bed. He fell asleep quickly, the way he always did. I lay there in the dark and listened to the refrigerator hum through 2 walls. I thought about the bathroom door, about my hands on the sink, about the word principal in his mouth. I left in the morning before he woke up. I told myself it was because I had things to do. I had laundry, I had a Sunday call with my mom. I had a whole list of reasonable things that made living at 7 a.m. feel like logistics and not like escape. I drove home in the grey November light, with the heat on full and my hands tight on the wheel. I kept rehearsing the conversation in my head. What I should have said, what I almost said, what I might say next time. Then I stopped because I just thought next time, and I didn't know if that was hope or a warning. I called Danny from the parking lot of my building and sat there for 40 minutes while she talked me through it. Her voice doing that careful thing where you can tell someone is choosing their words, not wanting to push, not wanting to pull. She said, "How do you feel right now?" And I said, "I feel like I left something there and I don't know if I want it back." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Maybe that's your answer." Maybe it was. He texted me that afternoon. Just, "Good morning, miss you already." With a photo of the blue mug on the windowsill, the parking lot dumpsters blurred in the background. I stared at that photo for a long time. The mug. The joke. The view that wasn't a view. I didn't text back right away. I'm not sure what that means about who I was then, or who I was becoming. I think I was standing at a door I couldn't quite name yet, trying to figure out which side of it I was on. The cedar smell was still in my hair when I finally put my phone down and went inside. I don't know if I ever fully got it out. The cedar smell stayed. Even after she put the phone down, even after she went inside, it stayed. Some things get into you before you know you've let them. She thought she'd found something steadier after that. A Tuesday morning routine, a seat she always took, a room that smelled like dry erase markers and old coffee. The quiet architecture of a life she was building on purpose. And someone in it she trusted enough to hand her phone over and say, "Look, it's nothing, see for yourself." His face changed before he'd even finished reading. What do you do when the thing that was supposed to prove your innocence becomes the evidence against you, and the door closes before you can explain a single word? Tuesday mornings, I always took the seat third from the left in the second row of Professor Harlan's developmental psychology class. Close enough to see the board clearly, far enough back that I didn't feel like I was being watched. It was a small room, room 114 in Callaway Hall, the kind that smelled like dry erase markers and the ghost of someone's coffee from the 8 o'clock section before us. The heating vent above the door clicked on every 20 minutes or so, and when it did, the papers on the front desk would lift at the corners, just slightly, like they were thinking about leaving. It was the fall semester of my junior year. I was finally taking the classes that actually mattered for my major, the ones I'd been waiting 2 years to get to. I remember the specific weight of that, like something had shifted into gear. His name was Marcos. We'd been together since the previous spring, about 7 months by the time October came around. We had the kind of relationship that felt easy in the best way. Sunday mornings with bad coffee and good music, long phone calls when one of us had a hard day. He was studying architecture on the other side of campus, which meant we didn't share any classes, didn't overlap in the same buildings. We existed in separate orbits that touched at the edges, and for a while, that felt like enough. The small thing I noticed first, the hairline crack, was how he'd sometimes go quiet after I mentioned class. Not upset exactly, just still, like he was filing something away. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself he was just tired. I should have noticed it earlier. The classmate at the center of everything was named Dylan. And I want you to understand, before anything else, exactly who Dylan was in my life. He was the person who sat one row behind me and 2 seats to the right. We had exchanged maybe 40 words total before the 3rd week of October. He was pre-med, taking developmental psych as an elective, and he was struggling with the material in a way that was obvious from how he held his pen over his notebook, hovering, not writing, because he didn't know what to write down. One day after class, he stopped me in the hallway, the narrow one that always smelled faintly of the custodian's lemon cleaner. He asked if I had notes from the week he'd missed due to a family thing. That was it. That was the whole thing. I said yes, I'd take a photo and send them. He gave me his number. I texted him a photo of 4 pages of notes. He said thanks. I said no problem. We were assigned to the same discussion group 2 weeks later, the way you are in any class where the professor decides participation matters. There were 5 of us. We made a group chat. We divided up the review sheet. I texted Dylan twice about the assignment, once to confirm his section, once to ask if he could pull the citation for a study with both referenced. That was the full inventory of our communication. A photo of notes, 2 texts, a group chat with 3 other people in it. Marcus saw the text on a Thursday evening. I left my phone on the kitchen counter while I was in the shower. Something I'd done 100 times. Something that had never mattered before. When I came back out, he was sitting at the table and my phone was face down in front of him. He had a look on his face that I had never seen before and have not been able to forget since. It was 7:14 in the evening. I remember because the news was just starting on the TV. We never really watched. "Who's Dylan?" he asked. Not loud, almost calm. I told him exactly what I told you just now. A classmate, a study group, notes I'd shared. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're not accepting what you've said, just acknowledging that you've said it. "You text him a lot?" "Marcos, it was twice, about an assignment." "And the notes?" "I sent him notes. He missed class." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You didn't tell me about him." And I remember standing there in the kitchen doorway, still holding my towel, genuinely confused. "I didn't tell you about him because there's nothing to tell." "Then why does he have your number?" You know that feeling when you've explained something true so many times, it starts to sound like a lie? I was 4 sentences in and I was already there. I sat down across from him. I tried to be patient. I walked him through the group project. I showed him the group chat, 4 names, a thread full of citation links and meeting time suggestions. I showed him the 2 individual texts. I showed him the photo of the notes, which were, genuinely, just notes. 4 pages of my handwriting about Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. He looked at all of it. He handed my phone back. "Okay," he said. But it wasn't okay. I could feel that it wasn't okay, the same way you can feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Not seeing it, just knowing. "I just feel like..." He started and then stopped. Started again. "I feel like you're building this whole life over there that I'm not part of." And there it was. The real thing underneath the thing about Dylan. I had been waiting, without knowing I was waiting, for that sentence. "That's called having a major," I said. I didn't mean it to sound cold. It came out cold. He pushed back from the table and went to the other room. We spent the rest of that evening in the specific silence that is worse than arguing. The kind where both people are present and neither person is there. In the days after, I went to class the same way I always had. But something had shifted in how it felt to be there. I'd sit down in my seat, 3rd from the left, 2nd row, and I'd feel the faint ghost of his question, "Who's Dylan?" hovering just above the desk. I started checking my phone more. Not because I expected anything from Dylan, but because I was suddenly aware of my phone as an object that could be read, could be misread, could become evidence of something that wasn't happening. I stopped texting the group chat as freely. I'd draft a message, look at it, and think about how it would look to someone reading over my shoulder. Then I'd send it anyway, because it was about a citation, because it was about a meeting time, because there was no version of me that could justify being afraid to talk to my study group about developmental psychology. But I felt the fear anyway. That's the part I hate most when I think back on it. Marcus and I talked again that weekend, a real conversation, not an argument, the kind where both people are trying. He said he was sorry for how he'd acted. He said he trusted me. He said the thing about building a separate life had come out wrong, that he was just feeling the distance between our schedules, the way we'd been seeing each other less as the semester got harder. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Those two things were not the same. The version of me that was purely relieved, she lasted about 9 days. Because 3 weeks later, after our group had finished the project and turned it in, Dylan sent me a message in the individual thread to say thanks. That he thought we'd done well, that he appreciated the help early in the semester with the notes. It was 4 sentences long. It was the kind of message you send when something ends and you want to be a decent person about it. Marcus saw that one too. I'm still not entirely sure how, whether he'd picked up my phone again or whether I'd left it open somewhere. Whether it had come through as a notification on the screen. The how of it doesn't matter as much as what happened next. He didn't ask me about it this time. He just went quiet. The particular quiet that I now understood was not tiredness and was not distraction. It was the quiet of someone who had already decided what something meant. We had a long, terrible conversation that night. The kind that starts at 10 and doesn't end until you've both said things you cannot take back. He said he felt like I was choosing school over him. I said school was not a choice I was making against him. It was a thing I was doing for myself. He said that was easy for me to say. I said I didn't know what he wanted me to do. Drop the class? Stop having classmates? He didn't answer that, which was its own kind of answer. At some point I said, I don't know how to make you feel safe when I haven't done anything wrong. And I meant it as something gentle. It didn't land gently. He left around midnight. He texted me from the parking lot, just, I need some space to think. I sat on the couch for a long time after that. The apartment was very quiet. I thought about all the things I could have done differently. And then I thought about whether any of them were actually things I should have done differently. And I couldn't find the line between those two questions. We didn't break up that night. We didn't break up the next week either. We moved through a kind of limbo that I think both of us were too tired to resolve, seeing each other less, talking in shorter sentences. Being careful with each other in the way that you're careful with something you're afraid is already broken. I finished the semester. I got a grade in developmental psychology that I was genuinely proud of. I sat in room 114 for the last class in December. Professor Harlan turned off the projector and said something about how development never really stops, how we're all mid-process all the time. And the heating vent clicked on above the door and the papers lifted at their corners one last time. I thought about Marcus on the drive home. I thought about the version of that fall semester where I'd felt the gear shift into place, where I'd finally been doing the work I'd been waiting to do. And how somewhere in the middle of it, I'd started to feel like that was something I had to hide. Things between us ended quietly in January. Not with a fight, with a phone call that went too long and said too little, and ended with both of us saying okay in the particular way that means goodbye. I still have the notes from that semester. All of them, the ones I kept for myself and the ones I photographed for a classmate who was struggling, who just needed a hand getting caught up, who never knew he'd become the subject of something so much bigger than 4 pages of handwriting. Sometimes I take out those notes and I look at my own writing. The careful headings, the diagrams, the way I'd start the things Professor Harlan said twice. And I think about how much I love being in that room. And how strange it is that the thing I'm grieving isn't just him. It's the version of me who sat down in that seat and didn't yet know to be afraid of it. The notes on the desk. The careful headings. The stars beside the things he said twice, drawn by a hand that didn't yet know what they were recording. Some stories leave you in a room you can't find the door out of. This one starts differently. not with a room that turned dangerous, but with one that slowly went quiet. There's a chipped mug, a bookshelf headboard, chamomile tea going cold on one side of the bed while something unnamed goes cold on the other. And then, one night, a cat yowls somewhere in the apartment, and when the sound fades, he doesn't look over. He just stares at the ceiling like a man who has already left a place he hasn't physically left yet. The question isn't what happened between them. The question is whether she saw it coming, that look on his face, hollow and still, and chose the tea anyway. The mug I kept on my side of the bookshelf headboard had a chip in the handle from the day we moved in. Mara had wrapped it in a dish towel that wasn't thick enough, and when the box hit the floor of the new apartment, I heard the crack before I even opened it. She'd looked at me with this expression, half wince, half waiting, and I had said, "It's fine, I'll still use it." And I did. Every night. That chipped mug, chamomile tea going cold while I read. Mara on her side, doing whatever she did on her phone before sleep. It felt like a ritual. It felt, honestly, like something I'd been waiting my whole adult life to have. That was 14 months ago. The apartment was a one-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building that smelled permanently of someone else's cooking. Cumin mostly, and sometimes something sweet I could never identify. We'd painted the living room a color the swatch called sea salt, but which was really just off-white with a little hope mixed in. Mara had picked it. I'd agreed because I liked watching her hold paint chips up to the light, squinting like she was making a serious decision about something that mattered. Everything she did with intention like that, I loved it. I wanted to be in the rooms she'd decided on. We had a good system, the way people say they have a good system when they mean they'd quietly sorted out who does what without ever having the conversation directly. I cooked on weekdays, she handled the dishes. I bought the groceries, she remembered the things I always forgot. Olive oil, batteries, the specific oat milk she'd slowly converted me to over 6 months of patient, gentle insistence. We shared a streaming password and a set of grey towels, and the standing argument about whether the thermostat should be at 68 or 70 degrees. At night, we had the bookshelf headboard. It was one of those IKEA things we'd assembled together on a Sunday afternoon, both of us sitting cross-legged on the floor with the instruction sheet spread between us. We argued amiably about which dowel went where. Her side held a water bottle, a rotating stack of paperbacks with broken spines, and a small succulent she'd named Gerald. My side had the chipped mug, a phone charger that was always slightly too short, and whatever I was reading. That's where most of our nighttime life happened, in that 2-foot strip of space between our pillows and the wall. What I wanted, and I want to be careful here because this isn't a story about something dramatic. It's a story about something small that turned out to be very large. What I wanted was more of her. More of her attention in that specific window of time before sleep, when the day was done and we were just 2 people in the same room with nowhere else to be. I wanted to talk. Not about logistics, not about whose turn it was to call the landlord about the bathroom fan, but the other kind of talking. The kind where you say something true and then wait to see if the other person says something true back. Mara was tired. Mara was always tired. She worked in hospital administration, which sounds like a desk job until you understand what it actually involves. Which is being the person every single department calls when something goes wrong, which is always. She came home with a particular kind of exhaustion that lived behind her eyes. I knew this. I respected it. I told myself I respected it. But I kept waiting for the nights when she wouldn't reach for her phone. I kept waiting for her to want the same window I wanted. The specific evening I keep coming back to was a Wednesday in late October. I know it was Wednesday because I'd made the pasta I only make on Wednesdays, the one with the brown butter and the sage. And I remember feeling almost deliberately optimistic about it, like if the dinner was good enough, the night would follow. You know that feeling? When you put effort into something small, and you're hoping the effort communicates something you haven't figured out how to say yet. Dinner was good. She said so. She cleaned her plate and poured herself a second glass of the wine we'd opened. And for a little while we sat at the table after eating, just talking, and I thought, here it is. The thing I'd been waiting for. This easy, unhurried version of us. We did the dishes together. Not our system, just a spontaneous thing. And she bumped my shoulder with hers at the sink, which was something she did when she was in a good mood, and I felt the evening open up like a window. We went to bed around 10:30. I made the tea. I got in. I put my book face down on my chest and waited. Mara came out of the bathroom, climbed in, pulled the blanket up, and reached for her phone. I watched her face go soft and absent in the blue light of it. I said, "Hey," just that, just hey. She said, without looking up. And I said, and this is the part I've replayed about 40 times since. I said, I was just wondering if we could, I don't know, talk for a bit. She looked up then. Not annoyed, not closed off, just tired. Genuinely, visibly tired. She said, "About something specific?" "No," I said. "Just talk." She looked at me for a second, and I watched her try to find the energy for it. And I watched her not quite find it, and she said, "Can we do it tomorrow? I'm really..." She gestured at herself, at the exhaustion she was wearing like a second skin. "Yeah," I said. "Of course." She put her phone down. She did put it down, I want to be fair. And she turned toward me and kissed me once, soft, on the side of my jaw. And she said, "You're good." And she turned off her light. I lay there in the dark with my tea going cold and my book still face down on my chest. I should have said something then. I don't know what. But something. Instead, I turned my light off too, and I stared at the ceiling, and I listened to her breathing even out. And I thought about the chipped mug, and how I'd said it's fine, I'll still use it. And how that had felt like a sweet thing to say at the time. That night wasn't the worst night. That's almost the hardest part to explain. It wasn't a fight. There was nothing to point to. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was tired, she asked for a rain check, she kissed me before she slept. If I told a friend about it, they would have said, "That sounds fine actually." And they would have been right. It was fine. But I started noticing things after that. The way you notice a sound in the walls only after you've heard it once. I noticed that the rain check never really came. Not the next night, not the one after. I'd bring something up, something real, something I'd been thinking about, and she'd engage for a minute or two and then drift. Eyes going to the middle distance. And I'd feel myself talking faster to hold her attention, which is a terrible thing to feel. And then I'd stop talking, and there'd be a silence. And she'd say something like, "Sorry, I'm just fried." And I'd say, "No, it's okay." And we'd both reach for our respective sides of the headboard. I started reading more. Not because I wanted to read more. Because it gave me something to do with my hands and my eyes, while I waited for something that wasn't coming. The mornings got careful. Not cold, careful. There's a difference. Cold is a temperature. Careful is a posture. I'd make coffee and she'd come into the kitchen and I'd hand her a mug and we'd talk about the day ahead. And it was all perfectly functional, perfectly kind. And I'd watch her leave for work and stand at the window for a minute afterward, holding my own mug, not sure what I was waiting for. One Saturday she asked me if I was okay, and I said yes. And she looked at me, the way she looks at things she's not quite sure she believes. And then she nodded and went back to whatever she was reading. And I thought, say it. Just say what you want. Just say you're lonely in a specific and embarrassing way that you don't entirely understand yourself. I didn't say it. I went and sat on my side of the couch. We'd also divided the couch, I realized, without ever deciding to. And I picked up my book and I read the same paragraph 4 times without absorbing a word. The apartment felt the same as it always had. Same off-white walls, same cumin smell drifting up from somewhere below us. But I'd started sitting with my back to the bedroom. I don't know when that started. I just noticed one evening that I'd rearranged without meaning to, and that I was facing the window instead of the hall. And that when I heard her footsteps, I didn't turn around the way I used to. I don't know what I wanted her to fix. I'm not sure she could have fixed it, even if I'd asked. That's the part that keeps me up now. I've tried to work out whether this is about her or about me. Whether I need something she genuinely doesn't have to give. Or whether I never learned to ask for things directly. Or whether we just got into a rhythm that quietly stopped intruding the parts that mattered to me. And we were both so careful about being reasonable. So committed to not being the person who makes things hard that we let it hollow out without either of us saying a word. I still use the chipped mug. It's sitting on my side of the headboard right now actually. Chamomile. Probably cold by the time I finish saying this. Mara's working late tonight. She texted to say she'd be home by 9. I texted back a thumbs up and then stared at the thumbs up for a second after I sent it, trying to remember the last time I'd sent her an actual sentence. I don't know where we are. I genuinely don't know if this is a season we're in or a direction we're heading. I don't know if what I want is reasonable or if I've been wanting it wrong, or if there's even a difference between those two things. What I know is this: every night I make the tea. I get in. I put my book face down on my chest, and I keep waiting for her to want the same window I want. And the window keeps being there, and it keeps being just mine. The lamp's still on in the other room. Not turned off, just left on, like someone meant to come back. You know that feeling when you realize you've been holding your breath and you don't know exactly when you started? Not during the scary part, before it. During the part that still looked normal. The part where you were still telling yourself it was fine. It was probably fine. You were probably reading too much into it, and somewhere in your chest, something already knew. That's the thing about the stories we heard tonight. None of them started with something obvious. They started with a lamp left on, a door left open, a silence that had a shape to it. And I think most of us have been in a room like that. Maybe we are still in one. The hardest part isn't the moment you finally name it. The hardest part is all the time you spend being a fair witness to someone who wasn't being fair to you. Giving the benefit of the doubt like it was yours to give, over and over, like it didn't cost you anything. Like you had an unlimited supply. You don't. Nobody does. There might be something you've been turning over quietly. Something you've explained away so many times, it's worn smooth in your hands. You don't have to do anything with it tonight. But I don't think it's nothing, and I don't think you do either. If you want to leave something in the comments, not a hot take, not advice for anyone, just something you've been carrying around and needed to set down somewhere, this is a decent place for that. And if you want to find your way back to this room, subscribing is how you do it. No pressure, just a door left unlocked. Some things stay small right up until they don't.